Hello, everybody. Welcome back as we continue our series today. This is Mom's Movement and Mindset, how to break through resistance and transform your body and mind. I'm your host, Don Fisher. Excited to speak with my guest today. It's my pleasure. My first time speaking with her. And of course, I'm speaking about Coonoor Behal. She is the founder and CEO of MindHatch, a consultancy that helps organizations create the conditions for innovation and creativity to thrive. Through MindHatch, Coonoor delivers her unique mix of expertise in design thinking, organizational improv, innovation facilitation, diversity, and inclusion. She is also the author of I Quit, The Life Affirming Joy of Giving Up, which will be published by New Degree Press in April of 2021. Hi, Coonoor. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. Super appreciative. We'll jump right in. So my first question for you, and people that you've worked with, some of the process that you went through, maybe the research you've done for your book. Can you just define what resistance is to you, and then maybe even provide some examples that you've kind of experienced from people as far as like what you witnessed from them with resistance?
Yeah, to me, resistance is very much bound up with fear and often irrational fear and kind of worst case scenario thinking. And so I think I've lived that both in my work and then also through my kind of study of quitting for my book. And so in my work, I think, I do a lot of innovation and creativity work. So I'm kind of the one who comes into companies and helps teams or leaders or whole organizations really kind of embrace and pursue change, right? So not just letting change happen to them and then embracing it, but actually pursuing productive change, right? And so definitely come up to a lot of resistance there, whether it's at the individual level or at the organizational level. And I think a lot of that resistance comes up because people fear the unknown and they are very comfortable with what they know, even if what they know isn't working. It tends to be a default that people are more cozy in, and so I encounter that kind of psychology in my work all the time, and it's part of my joy of getting to kind of counsel people through that and, even think through like, scientific reasoning skills, and also like processes and organizational culture. And then I think it's very similar in my book. So my book, I Quit, The Life Affirming Joy of Giving Up. It has 19 stories. Each chapter is a story of a happy quitter. So someone who did have the courage to quit something that was no longer serving them in their lives. And I think without fail, the only regret people in my book have said they have is not quitting sooner, right? And so what prevented them from quitting sooner? Resistance, fear, thinking, kind of buying into this trick that society has played on all of us, that not pursuing change is somehow less risky than pursuing change.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I did an interview earlier today with a lady. Her name is Allison Jeffries, and she's a divorce coach. And she said
Oh,
that across the board, that was the same kind of feedback that she's gotten from a lot of the women that she's worked with, is that most people tended to say like, I wish I just didn't wait so long to
yeah.
put an end to it. Because time is obviously that one commodity we don't get back.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really interesting you bring that up because I actually got a divorce last year and it was not really connected to my book at all. I had the idea for the book years before divorce was on the horizon. But yeah, I think I'm grateful that I didn't stick it out. Right. I mean, I say in the book that like a lot of times if we find ourselves sticking it out, like ask yourself, am I stuck? It's like the same source word, sticking, stuck. And so yeah, so I definitely believe that a divorce coach has experienced that for sure as well. And I think that also reflects something like that I learned from the people I interviewed for my book, which is this idea of like they were quitting toward something. I think we're so trained by like society, family, culture, what have you, to think that, quitting is failure, that quitting is leaving a void, or it indicates the absence of something, the absence of a choice, but in actuality, in my own life and in the people in my book, they were quitting toward possibility and toward opportunity, right? And so they really benefited from opening that space in their lives, for things that they actually wanted, that were going to serve them well to come in.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe if you could like expound upon this a little bit more, but I mean, I had a woman speak about this, and this is a theme that I've seen kind of across the board is that failure doesn't mean I'm a failure. I mean, it's like a data point, it's just something like, okay, I can learn, right? And I can move from this. And it seems like some of the people you spoke to kind of had that
Mhm.
experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I share a lot about that exact same point, on LinkedIn a lot, which is that, failure is often productive. I mean, this is what I do in my work as well. It's like, okay, how do we pursue productive failure? And so productive failure is like, okay, that didn't work, that quote unquote failed, but by virtue of it not working, we learned how to make it better, right? We learned something that we could not have known before, to then iterate and make it work eventually, right? And so in my innovation work, like that's what I term like productive failure. And I think similarly in life, it's like, okay, well, so that thing didn't work out. That is merely new information for you to have about yourself, about your circumstances, and to kind of constantly self-interrogate, like, is this for me or is it not for me? And yeah, so exactly, I definitely agree with that from my personal experience, but also from talking to nearly 40 happy quitters. Only 19 stories were able to go in the book. But yeah, I think they definitely felt that it was like, I learned this wasn't working for me, so why am I still doing it? And I have the information I need to make progress, and so how can I overcome that resistance to kind of really making the choice that will be progressive for me?
I love the title too because it's definitely thought provoking. It makes you think at first like quitting, really. But
Mhm.
obviously from what I'm even just learning from you here and everything like that, it's insinuating like we're quitting things that don't serve us. And the
Yeah.
words that you've already used, the sticking, the stuck, it's like too many times I feel maybe people want to feel safe, and maybe that's why they stay stuck. I don't know. Did you experience that in the writing of your book?
Yeah, I definitely saw some people's stories, that there was safety in living life with inertia, right? Because then you wouldn't have to confront what could be possible, right? Or you wouldn't have to find out if you would regret that choice. And so I definitely kind of that a lot with people in my book, in terms of what caused them to not quit as soon as they later knew they should have, and it is that kind of comfort. One of the women's stories in the book, her story is titled "I Quit the American Dream." And she was kind of like on this path at a young age to have all the trappings and definition of success that we view as success in America. She was on track, well-paying job. She was on track to be able to buy a home. She was, on track to like marry her live-in boyfriend. And she found herself questioning, like, I have everything that I'm told I'm supposed to have, but I am not happy, and this isn't working for me. And I bring her up because in her case, her then boyfriend, possibly future fiance at the time, was uh, a stuck kind of person. Like she would have conversations with him about like, can we not just go to the same bar every night where the same people we know always are, and she shared her kind of craving for more and different things. And his response was like, I'm comfortable, like I like my rut, like that's what he said. And so she kind of had that counterpoint to like show her like, oh, I'm not like that. I don't want a rut, let alone will I like being in a rut. And so I think that like that's where it comes to mind specifically around, have that comfort and that safety of where you are. And she ultimately decided that, one, that didn't feel safe because she knew it wasn't working for her. But also she thought to herself, well, this is a good risk. This is a good, healthy risk for me to take. And I feel confident that I'm not going to regret it. And it was that confidence came from knowledge of herself, right? And I think that's a real theme in the book, which is, the more you know yourself in a given moment, the more confidence you can have that you won't regret that quitting decision.
Yeah, I mean, you just put that so beautifully. I've heard that from a few of our other speakers too. This idea of like too often we're seeking things outside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right. And then, I mean, at least in that example you just gave, it seemed like she started to look more so internally in like what
Yeah.
she truly wanted. And I mean, it sounds like maybe there's a happy ending, like with
Yes,
her at
yeah,
least.
yep. All of the stories in the book are about happy quitters, even if they sacrificed a great deal, some of them accepted trade-offs because of their choices that maybe you and I wouldn't accept, but they knew themselves well enough that they were like, okay, so I'm going to live out of my car with my two kids for a few months. Like, still they had no regrets, so the trade-offs really vary in like what people sacrifice in the book, but um unequivocally, like, no one regrets what they had to go through to make that choice.
I love that too. Like the moral of the story is like, you have this number of examples of these people who faced resistance,
Yeah.
pushed, they worked through that resistance,
Mhm.
and it worked out, right? And so that's like strength
Yeah.
and like, the experience is so powerful. I feel like that can just give people hope.
Yeah, thanks. The book is there's several dedications in the book, like who the book is dedicated to. And one thing I put in dedication was, I said this book is not dedicated to status quo thinking or the people who want to live their lives that way. And so I think a lot of it is about upending your own status quo, and having like the confidence, but also the humility. I think I use this phrase confident humility in the book a few times, where it takes confidence to make that choice, to overcome resistance and to make a change. But it also involves a lot of humility, because back to that kind of failure as a data point kind of thing. You can look at something like a decision you made 10 years ago, whether it's a job or a friendship or a marriage or an identity, and you can say, okay, that might have been the right decision for me then, but it's 10 years later. Like, why would I assume it has to be the right decision for me now? Because you change, you evolve, your circumstances change, you learn more about yourself, to understand yourself better and what your trade-offs would be. So I think it's just kind of like this false expectation that we give ourselves, that a choice that I made however much time ago or in whatever scenario somehow has to keep working for me now.
I think so. I wrote my senior thesis on Muhammad Ali.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and I'm trying to remember the quote exactly, but he said something along the lines of like, if I view the world at 50 the same way that I did at 20, I
Yeah.
have wasted 30 years of my life. So to your point of like, hey, things are not or should not stay the same for 10 years. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, if that is not truer than ever.
Yeah. And that's where the humility comes in. It's like, okay, well, that was the right decision for me then, but not now. Or it's like, oh, wow, I made a wrong decision back then and I'm gonna fix it, And so it's like, yeah. So I think what I observed in like the people that I interviewed was this confident humility. Yeah.
Perfect. So I mean, I love this right now because I've barely been looking at the questions, but I'm just looking down here, and I feel like what you kind of started to touch on, it applies here. But what what tips could you provide for people, right? Whether it's the individual or even the teams, to kind of overcome the fear and the anxiety or the resistance that they may face as they move on this journey of life.
Yeah, and I want to like first bring up a couple things. One, it's easier said than done, right? But I think I like to advise people, and I write about in the book about like a lot of, we talked about fear earlier on, that like resistance to me is bound up in fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what people will think, what people will say, and I think that like the more you can again self-interrogate, like whose fears you're living your life for, the more clarity you'll find, and so are you living your life out of the fears that your parents have for you, or are you living your life out of fears that you have for yourself, and so no one is without fear, right? And I don't think it's about ridding yourself of fear entirely. It's more about analyzing, okay, well, whose fears am I making my decisions based on? And do I share those fears or not? I mean, I personally wasted more years of my 20s than I wish to admit, kind of trying to doing the right thing, and it was about like financial stability and having a job and like doing the right thing and being obedient to authority and hierarchy and it was because no fault of their own, but those were outcomes of like fears my parents had for me, like fears any parent has for their kid. Any parent wants their kid to have stability, and I learned the hard way that, the usual route toward that was not good for me and didn't match my own values, but I had to go through those experiences to get clarity on what my values were, right? So I would say one, question what and whose fears you're living your life for, and if they match your own fears. But also view moments in life as mini experiments, like, okay, yeah, you got this job and it's ended up sucking. Okay, well, but what did you learn about yourself? Like, what did you learn about what you are willing to trade off and what you're not willing to trade off, and make your next decision based on what you've learned about yourself. So I would say, like, really look at maybe your past experiences, your past quitting experiences, or maybe should have quit experiences, and really see, like, okay, what does this say about me? And does what that say match with who I want to be? So I think, again, we're talking kind of like heady. We're not like 10 tips on how to like do this, but I think because it's so individual and so personal, that only you can kind of really make that decision for yourself. But I would say, you know, uh, build up your scar tissue for change and knowledge of yourself, and really assessing, in every moment and every decision, like, is this matching who I think I am or who I want to be?
Yeah, I mean that's awesome because it talks, at least for what I'm getting from you, is a little bit more like, hey, how can I be more authentic? And the thing that
Yeah.
I absolutely love too that you said is that when, I don't know, I've experienced this when somebody is, um, I'm going through something and I'm thinking like, is this even my belief? Like, because when we're babies, we're blank slates. And like what happens is, right, we get older and like you said, our parents are like, oh, don't do that, don't do this. And
Mhm.
how many times does somebody, like, if they sat there and were honest with themselves, like, I
Mhm.
don't actually believe that, it's just
Yeah,
like,
totally. Yeah,
I
I
don't
have
know.
this like story. I actually share this in the book, where in that moment where I decided to quit my corporate job and found my company, I remember telling friends of mine, that I was like, gosh, you know what? I think I just discovered that I'm just not that like typical South Asian, who obeys authority and respects hierarchy and can kind of like, do that. And for me, this was a new realization. And my friends were like, no shit, Coonoor. Like, we could have told you that years ago. And so, so I think there's also a lot of power in, like, a lot of times other people who know us well see things in us that we don't as yet, And so I always think of that, of like, oh, wow, okay, you knew that about me before I knew that about me. And so, yeah, they were not surprised by my conclusion about my love for hierarchy and authority. So
So, I mean, I'm feeling like pretty comfortable with you right now. And,
mhm.
we're talking about resistance more so from like first person, like ourselves. Did
Yeah.
you get any, based on what you just shared there, did you get any resistance from your family with the idea that, you wanted to be different and kind of go about it in a non-traditional way?
Yeah, really great question. And so happy to talk about that. I am super fortunate that, my parents are South Asian immigrants to America. I was born and raised here. And my parents have definitely not always subscribed to what we might think of as like the stereotypical kind of South Asian parent. My parents, by comparison to many other Indian parents I'm aware of, like, not controlling, aren't really into like interfering in our lives, and so so really kind of grateful for that. Even so, like, there definitely are things that come up, where I think I think I've probably caused my dad a lot of near heart attacks with my life decisions. He's just very good about not keeping it under wraps. And so which I'm grateful for. So I think maybe I've caused him a lot more agita than I even know. But when it came to kind of like job transitions, like I remember like my first career that I left because of sexual harassment. And it was a moment where I was early in my career, I was making no money, and I sought my parents basically permission to like leave this place where I was going to continuously be put in unsafe positions, and so that was a moment where I really did rely and depend on what they thought of the situation, and they were very much like, what's right, you do what you need to do, we're here to support you, and I want to have a little aside to that too, in terms of a question we talked about earlier, was that quitting is often an act of privilege, especially when you're quitting a job or even when you're quitting a marriage, and so I want to just like be really clear that like we understand that like not everyone has the same choices in life, and so me quitting a couple of careers were definitely like acts of privilege, because I had a graduate degree. I had faith that I would be employable again. I wasn't raising children, and so my universe of choices and options were different, because of privilege. So I just want to like put that out there. But back to the parents thing, I think I just visited my parents a couple of weeks ago, and I was driving myself to the airport with my parents in their car, and my dad, out of the blue, says, "Oh, Coonoor, do you want to go to law school?" And I just started laughing, and I was like, they were lucky I didn't like drive the car off the road, because I was laughing so hard, because I was like, what? Like, I've built this business over the past 8 years. I already have a graduate degree, I was like, no, like, no, I do not want to go to law school. And so
Oh man.
it was very funny to me. So I think there is, it's kind of like, oh, like what's next, like how can I mean, I come from a culture that really prioritizes and values education, and so I think that's kind of like often viewed as like the solution to something, is getting more education. But yeah, I know I'm talking a little elliptically about my parents, but they've been pretty supportive, and if they've ever disagreed with the decision I've made, they've generally kept it to themselves, and I think through their actions or inaction have showed me that they trust me, and they know I have a good head on my shoulders and don't do impulsively ridiculous things just for the sake of doing them. Yeah.
Perfect. And I don't mind you talking at all. You can talk as much
Okay.
as you want. So keeping it out there.
Mhm.
So I have two more questions for you. One just kind of came to what you're saying. Like when someone's facing maybe like some pushback or resistance, family, does setting boundaries, do you feel, does that play in somebody being able to, keep moving forward on with their vision and not having to worry about, again, that maybe that the chatter or whatever it is that someone else, like a friend or a colleague, may be throwing at them?
Yeah, I mean, I think boundaries are always a good thing, in any aspect of life, work or personal life or anything. I think boundaries are always plus one to boundaries, and so yeah, so I think setting those boundaries is definitely helpful, because I mentioned earlier, kind of like I've often been pleasantly surprised at what others have seen in me before I've seen it in myself. Um, but why I took that to heart was because it matched what I'd learned about myself. It was we had come to the same conclusion, even if I had taken a little longer to get there, I think like, so that's an example of like, oh yeah, my understanding of myself matches my friend's understanding of me. And I felt seen, right? And even respected in that moment. I think there might be other opportunities to create boundaries where maybe there is a mismatch, where someone is telling you something, or they're giving you advice, solicited or unsolicited, it's up to you to really kind of provide that bullshit detector or that filter of like, okay, like what is informing this person's advice? Like my dad out of blue saying, do you want to go to law school? Like that was easy to laugh off because I knew that was born of not my dad's understanding of me, but his point of view on the world and what success looks like, and I know from 40 years of being around him that his definition of what success looks like is different than what my definition is, so that's something where like a laughing boundary was put up, it was like, oh, that's gonna just like bounce off of me, like I'm made of Teflon. I'm not going to take that to heart, and we can laugh about how ridiculous it is, And so I think setting boundaries about who you listen to and how much you take that to heart, how much you absorb it, how much you make it a part of how you view your own sense of self. Those are boundaries that you create, right? And you decide who you trust or what might be giving their advice some bias that you don't have, right? And again, always that big question of, are they giving you advice or judging you based on their own fears or on like a deep knowledge of you and what you value?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's super, that's powerful what you just said. And a theme that I've across the board have heard too is just being authentic, being real, knowing what you want. And sometimes that requires working on yourself first, because once you have that sense of self, which you seem to just, I mean, it's just radiating off of you. You can then, like you said, you can laugh off your dad because you know what is for you and like what you're striving toward. And that kind of just came in like trying to almost redirect you. And nope, not that. I know what I want. I know what I'm going for. So that shows, your strength. And I feel like most people can get that same thing if they just, this awareness comes to them.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that I was like born with that awareness either. I definitely went to graduate school for the wrong reasons, and so but I think the fact that I knew that and absorbed that and I learned from that, is the point. Like we're gonna make mistakes, we're gonna make decisions because we don't know enough about ourselves to like make a different decision, and that's okay, and so no one has like a, what is it, 1,000% batting average? I don't know baseball. I don't know what that is. But no
That
one
would
is
be yes.
100%. Yeah, okay, great. No one is like perfect, in their decision making. It's about, again, that productive risk, right? And are you making a move that's gonna, at the very least, allow you to learn more about yourself?
Absolutely. And just a quick little check there. Yeah. It's the best baseball players in the world. Their batting average is about 300. Right. And
Oh,
that
nice.
means they're failing 7 out of 10 times and they're
Yeah.
making millions of dollars. Um,
I was just reminded of that yesterday. I did like a tennis lesson yesterday morning, and I'm not a great tennis player, but I was just trying to get the ball back so I could rally with my partner. And every time I missed, I was saying sorry, sorry, and the instructor was like, "Don't say sorry." He was like, "You're watching the U.S. Open right now. Like, how many times those people miss. He was like, they're professionals. So like everyone misses. I was like, God, you're so right. Like no one goes through a match not hitting a ball in the net, even the pros do. So yeah.
Absolutely. So I just have one more question for you, Coonoor, and then we'll wrap it up. Can you just speak a little bit, again, whether it's your own personal journey, working with the teams or the individuals you've worked with, but how overcoming resistance can help to develop resiliency, right, or strength, so that it then becomes easier to face larger challenges down the road?
Yes, absolutely. And if I can, I'd love to kind of put a plug in for one of my passions, which is improv comedy, which is great training for resilience, acting in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity, and kind of building that muscle, and so I think yes, it's definitely resilience is built from those trials and successes and constant iterations and mini reinventions, that you might make for yourself. Because I can point to the book, many of the people that I interviewed, they what one of the fears they had was like, oh my God, like my family will stop speaking to me, or what will they think, or da da da, and then they made the quitting choice, and all of them were shocked at like, oh wow, everyone was okay with it. The sky didn't fall, the apocalypse didn't appear, and so I think it goes to that worst case scenario thinking. And then, I think once you make that action and you realize, oh, wait a second, everything is fine. This was not as risky as I thought it was going to be. I think that also, that experience time and time again builds resilience, and probably will build your appetite for making more of those productive choices for yourself. And so I definitely think, overcoming resistance and making actions based on that makes it easier and easier to do that again. Like many of the people I spoke to, including the woman who quit the American dream, said, yeah, once I did that one big quit, I was ready to quit everything. They're like, I realized how much easier it could be. Like once they ripped that band-aid off, they were like, felt so empowered to make even more bold choices for themselves and for their lives. And so I think that definitely hits on that resiliency aspect.
Coonoor, thank you so much, and thank you for being resilient throughout this whole thing. Everybody watching at home, again, this is Mom's Movement and Mindset: How to Break Through Resistance and Transform Your Body and Mind. Coonoor, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to offer the awesome insight and value that you provided us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and the free I Quit toolkit that everyone will have access to actually will take you through re-examining some of your past quitting choices and understanding more about yourself through them. So I hope everyone finds that valuable.
Perfect. Yeah, and that'll be in the link in the email. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be incredible. Thank you again.
Well,